Today we're going to bend some steel, stain some cedar, and make a hairpin leg chair. This video is sponsored by Cabot Stain. I am collaborating with them on Cabot's 2022 Trend of the Year, creating an outdoor oasis. For me, that means building a new chair for my outdoor office using Cabot's solid color acrylic stain and sealer in Pewter Gray. Hairpin legs make it really easy to DIY tables and benches, but I wanted to design a one-piece solution that could work with them that would make chairs just as easy. I'm going to start with some scrap pieces of plywood, and I just drew a design right on a 10-inch wide board. I'm going to be working with 3/8-inch diameter steel rod, and this plywood template will just give me a reference point to bend it around. I screwed the template to a bigger piece of plywood and then placed a scrap piece of rod and a popsicle stick to use as a spacer before screwing in some side scraps that will hold the steel in place while I do the bending. I was just making up this design as I went, and I was glad that I saved those angled scraps because they came in handy for clamp bending the steel. It's just easier to clamp things that have flat surfaces that are parallel to each other. I kept using a combination of clamps and these blocks to try to get the steel as tight to the template as possible. Once I got one side approximately right, I just used my angle grinder to trim the piece on one of the straightaways. The steel's pretty springy, so it's hard to hold it all the way against the template and drive in screws. But I figured this was a good chance to use one of my favorite new tools, the Viking arm. The hardest spots to get the steel tight to the template were on the radiuses around the ends. So here I used my Maker brand T-bar clamps to really pull it tight. Once I got it snug, I just drove in screws to hold the steel in place. Yeah, these Viking arm things are surprisingly powerful. I want to trim the other side as close to the other side as possible so I don't have to span too big of a gap with the welder. I got it cut pretty precisely with just about a 1/16 inch gap. And then I used a screwdriver to lever out some of the slack and get the two ends to touch. For here I just took my Forney welder and tacked the two pieces together. I removed the steel and was pleasantly surprised to see that it mostly held its shape. I flipped it over and connected the ends with nice solid welds. I put it back in the template and then gave it a nice squeeze with the T-bar clamps, just to make sure the two straightaways were nice and parallel. I screwed some plywood on top, and now I can bend either side. I just picked an angle that looked right for a backrest, and then welded another bar end to end. This type of metalworking is really easy, and you can do so much with just a simple welding machine and an angle grinder. The hairpin legs I'm going to use are 3-rod models, so I like the idea of doing the same thing for the backrest. I cut a piece of angle steel to support the seat of the chair, and then I clamped it to the legs. This is just going to help me align the back leg to these hairpin legs that I got from Semi-Exact. I stacked some scraps aligned with the bottom of the hairpin legs just to give me a guide so that I would know exactly where to weld my bent steel rod contraption to the angle steel. For the backrest, I just grabbed a scrap piece of 1/8-inch thick flat bar, brushed off the rust, and welded it to the steel rods. Once it was welded, I just took the angle grinder and trimmed the ends. Now all I gotta do is drill holes for the screws and get ready to paint. And when I say get ready to paint, well, really just like wipe it down with a rag, because I'm using Krylon Fusion all-in-one spray paint. I really like it because it's paint and primer all in one, which totally reduces my prep time. They have a ton of great colors, and it works on a lot of different materials. For the seat and backrest, I'm using 2x6 cedar scraps. They have rounded over edges, and I just trimmed those off with my SawStop table saw. To join the seat boards together, I'm going to use my Pocket Hole Jig. I'm using the 720 Pro from Kreg. I use waterproof glue on the edges and then clamp the boards together before driving in the pocket screws. Now for the center board, I lined up the pocket holes so you're only seeing one set of divots in the boards themselves, but I can screw both ways. You could fill these up with a dowel or wood putty if you wanted to, but this is going to be on the underside of the seat, so I'm not too worried. Once the glue had fully cured, I used my Kreg straight edge guide and a circular saw to trim the ends. Cedar can be a little bit splintery, so I just drew a radius with a pencil and then trimmed the corners with my jigsaw. I rounded over all the edges with a 1/2 inch roundover bit and a palm router before starting the sanding process. The sanding goes really fast when you're working with a softwood like cedar. I started with 80 grit and worked my way up to 150 grit. And now for the staining. I'm going to start with a really good brush to apply this Cabot solid color acrylic stain and sealer in Cabot's color of the year, Pewter Gray. I like the Cabot stains for a lot of reasons. One, they have a lifetime guarantee. It's also their strongest weather barrier that blocks most UV rays. It has the maximum scuff resistance. And even though we don't need it in this case, it can cover old stain of all kinds and mismatched boards. I actually first started using Cabot projects way back during my architecture career, and we would specify their pre-weathering stains and some of these gray stains for exterior cedar siding. They were recommended to us by experienced builders, and we really like them as a way to get a nice modern aesthetic even when you're using natural wood. I brushed on a fairly thick coat using my Purdy brush. I like to use a good brush so I don't get random brush fibers into the stain. And then I used a clean microfiber rag to wipe away the excess. Now this is the really important part because the harder you wipe, the more stain you remove and the more grain shows through. So you want to apply nice consistent pressure with your hand, but you can keep swiping back and forth until you get it to look the way you want. Look for the link in the description to learn more about Cabot stains. And while I really appreciate their color of the year being my favorite color, gray, they got a lot of other color options as well. Now that the pieces are done, the chair assembles in seconds. I just used 1 1/4 inch long panhead screws and screwed on the pieces. Actually, I really like how this steel design came out, and I'm going to suggest it to my friends over at Semi-Exact to see if they want to turn this into a product. Now, obviously, they can make these a lot better because they have like robotic wire benders and all kinds of cool stuff. But this was an easy one-day project, and I'm really excited to have hairpin chairs that can match my hairpin tables. Cabot's Pewter Gray stain is a perfect balance of weathered gray and comforting neutrals. Look at how nice it blends in with the plants and the green table. And it's the anchoring color used in the elements of all 3 Trend of the Year projects. Thanks for watching. I put links to everything in the description. And go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Okay, thanks. Bye.